Imagine a journey that does not end in days, months, or even years, but continues across an entire human lifetime and beyond. A journey so long that everyone who boards the spacecraft knows with certainty that they will never return, and that even their children and their children's children may never see the destination. A 100-year journey through space is not just a test of technology, it is a test of the human body itself. Not in moments of danger or sudden catastrophe, but in the quiet, relentless passage of time, day after day, year after year, inside an environment that was never meant for living flesh. Space is often imagined as empty and peaceful, but for the human body it is an environment that constantly works against life. Without gravity, without a natural day and night, without open air or open land, the body begins to change in ways that are subtle at first and irreversible later on. On a journey that lasts a few months, these changes are manageable. On a journey that lasts a few years, they become serious. But on a journey that lasts a full century, the human body is forced to adapt so deeply that it may no longer resemble the body that first left Earth. Bones slowly weaken, muscles forget how to hold weight. The heart learns to pump differently, the immune system changes how it recognizes danger. Even the brain, protected inside the skull, begins to reorganize itself in response to isolation, repetition, and artificial environments. This journey is not about speed. It is not about reaching a distant star quickly, it is about endurance across generations, about what happens when biology is stretched far beyond the conditions it evolved for, and asked to keep going anyway. Inside a spacecraft travelling for 100 years, the human body would live without natural wind, without weather, without true silence, and without true darkness. Every sound would be mechanical, every surface artificial, every breath recycled. Over time, the body would stop expecting Earth. It would stop preparing for gravity. It would stop responding the way it once did. Instead, it would slowly become something adapted to corridors, restraints, controlled light, and permanent confinement. This is not a story of sudden failure. It is a story of gradual transformation. Changes that happen so slowly that they may feel harmless at first, but accumulate until the original human form becomes difficult to recognize. As this journey unfolds, the question is no longer whether humans could survive 100 years in space, but whether the humans who arrive would still be the same kind of beings who once lived under open skies. Before we begin, if you enjoy long, quiet journeys through space and time, you're very welcome to subscribe to Theories Before Sleep. New videos are made to be listened to slowly, without rush, without noise, and without needing to stay awake. Tonight we will explore what happens to the human body when time itself becomes the greatest challenge. Not through speculation, not through science fiction, but through what biology already tells us about life in isolation, weightlessness, and extreme duration. This is the story of a body that never stops traveling and never truly comes home. Imagine the journey beginning not with drama or urgency, but with stillness. A vessel leaves Earth's orbit slowly, deliberately, almost gently, carrying a human body that evolved for gravity, daylight, seasons, and constant biological feedback from a living planet. The moment the engines quiet and the ship settles into deep space, the body enters an environment it was never designed to endure for a century. Nothing breaks immediately. Nothing feels catastrophic. Instead, the changes arrive softly, layering themselves over time, reshaping the body so gradually that the traveller might not notice them day by day. Only in hindsight, when memories of Earth feel strangely incompatible with how the body now exists. In the first months of the journey, gravity disappears as a daily force. Muscles that once worked simply to keep the body upright begin to rest far more than nature intended. Without resistance, muscle fibers slowly thin, not from injury but from irrelevance. Bones follow the same path. Calcium, no longer needed to resist constant downward pressure, leaches into the bloodstream and is filtered away. Even with exercise machines and carefully planned routines, the body never fully replaces what gravity once provided. Over years, bone density declines in a way that mirrors extreme aging on Earth, compressing decades of skeletal change into a much shorter subjective span. The body becomes lighter, not in mass but in structural strength, as if its internal architecture is quietly being redesigned for a different universe. Blood circulation also adapts. Fluids shift upward, pooling toward the head and chest instead of the legs. Faces appear slightly swollen. Vision changes subtly as pressure alters the shape of the eyes. The heart, no longer working against gravity, begins to weaken just enough to matter. It still beats reliably, faithfully, but its strength recalibrates to a world where pushing blood uphill is no longer necessary. Over long stretches of time, this altered circulation reshapes how organs interact, how oxygen is delivered, and how the body interprets effort and rest. The immune system, finely tuned to Earth's microbial ecosystem, enters unfamiliar territory. In the sterile, recycled environment of a spacecraft, immune responses shift. Some defenses weaken from lack of exposure, others overreact to harmless stimuli. Latent viruses that once slept quietly within the body can reactivate, emerging not as dramatic illness but as persistent low-level stress on the system. Wound healing slows. Inflammation behaves unpredictably. The body remains alive and functional, but its internal balance grows increasingly fragile, like a complex instrument drifting out of calibration without ever fully breaking. Sleep itself begins to change in deep space. Without a natural day-night cycle, circadian rhythms must be artificially imposed. Light becomes a tool rather than an environmental truth. Over years, the brain adapts, but never perfectly. Hormones tied to sleep, alertness, and mood fluctuate in unfamiliar patterns. Dreams become vivid, sometimes fragmented, influenced by isolation and the absence of natural sensory variation. Memory, too, begins to behave differently. Without the constant novelty of Earth's environment, the brain compresses time strangely. Days blur, months feel indistinct, decades may pass without the psychological landmarks that normally separate one era of life from another. As the journey stretches into years, radiation becomes an unavoidable companion. Beyond Earth's magnetic shield, high-energy particles pass through the ship and the body itself. Shielding reduces exposure but cannot eliminate it. Over time, radiation damages DNA in small, cumulative ways. Most damage is repaired, some is not. Cancer risk rises quietly, probabilistically, without guaranteeing disease. Cells age faster at the molecular level. The body does not feel attacked. It simply becomes more vulnerable, more statistically fragile, carrying invisible scars written into its genetic code. The digestive system adapts as well. Diets become repetitive, carefully engineered for efficiency rather than pleasure. Taste dulls slightly. The microbiome, shaped on Earth by immense dietary diversity, simplifies. Digestion remains functional, but its resilience diminishes. The gut-brain connection, so deeply influenced by environment and social interaction, becomes quieter, less dynamic. Appetite changes. Eating becomes routine, rather than desire-driven, a biological task rather than a sensory experience. Psychological changes are just as profound, though harder to measure. Isolation reshapes perception. Without the presence of large social groups, the brain's social circuits adapt downward. Emotional responses flatten, not as depression, but as efficiency. Strong emotional reactions require contrast, novelty, and unpredictability. In the steady, controlled environment of a century-long voyage, emotions smooth themselves out. Joy becomes quieter, anxiety becomes more abstract. The mind turns inward, spending more time in reflection, memory, and imagination than in reaction. Over decades, sensory deprivation accumulates. No wind touches the skin. No natural horizon stretches into the distance. Smells are recycled. Sounds are mechanical and familiar. The brain compensates by amplifying internal experiences. Thoughts grow longer. Mental imagery becomes richer. Memories replay themselves, sometimes merging with imagination. The boundary between recollection and invention softens. The traveller may remember places that no longer exist, or imagine futures that will never arrive, with equal emotional weight. The endocrine system adapts slowly to this altered existence. Hormones tied to stress, reproduction and growth adjust downward. Fertility may decline not from dysfunction, but from the body interpreting the environment as unsuitable for continuation. Sexual drive changes, influenced by isolation, radiation exposure, and hormonal shifts. The body prioritizes maintenance over expansion, survival over reproduction, preservation over legacy. As decades pass, aging itself accelerates in some ways and slows in others. Telomeres shorten under radiation stress, yet physical wear from gravity and impact is reduced. The skin thins but bruises less. Joints ache less but lose structural support. The body becomes a paradox, simultaneously fragile and preserved, aged in molecular detail but spared certain earthbound forms of damage. The nervous system, bathed in the quiet consistency of space, reorganizes subtly. Reaction times change. Attention becomes deeper but narrower. The brain becomes exceptionally good at sustaining long periods of low stimulation. Silence no longer feels empty. Stillness no longer feels passive. The mind learns to exist without constant input, without external validation, without the need to respond quickly. Thought becomes slower but more continuous, like a river rather than a sequence of sparks. Throughout all of this, the body never stops being human. It adapts not because it was designed for space, but because adaptation is what living systems do. Every cell continues its quiet work. Every organ finds a way to function within new constraints. The body does not resist the journey. It yields to it, reshaping itself around the reality it inhabits. By the end of the first long stretch of the voyage, the traveller is no longer biologically identical to the person who left Earth, not transformed into something alien, but subtly, undeniably changed. A human body rewritten by absence rather than presence, by stillness rather than motion, by time rather than trauma. And this transformation is only beginning. As the journey continues beyond the early adaptations, the human body enters a phase where change is no longer reactive, but cumulative. The first adjustments to weightlessness, isolation and confinement have already been absorbed. Now, the body begins to reorganize itself more deeply, not in response to novelty, but in response to permanence. Space is no longer a temporary environment. It has become the only environment the body knows. Over many years, muscles no longer simply weaken, they redefine their purpose. Without gravity, muscles that once worked constantly in the legs, back and neck lose their original role. Even with artificial exercise, resistance can only imitate gravity, never replace it. The body learns that strength is no longer required in the same way. Muscle fibers shift toward endurance rather than power. Movements become smaller, more economical, designed for floating rather than standing. The posture of the body changes subtly, with the spine elongating slightly and natural curves flattening. What once felt like upright becomes an abstract memory. Bones continue their slow transformation. Calcium loss stabilizes at a lower equilibrium, but the structure itself becomes more porous, less dense, optimized for a world without impact. On Earth, bones are constantly reinforced by stress. In space, that stress is absent. Over decades, the skeletal system becomes lighter, more flexible, but also more vulnerable to sudden force. A fall that would have been harmless on Earth could become catastrophic if gravity were ever reintroduced. The body adapts fully to space, but at the cost of losing its ability to return. The cardiovascular system undergoes one of the most profound long-term shifts. The heart, no longer needing to fight gravity, gradually reduces its muscle mass. Blood vessels adjust their elasticity. Blood pressure stabilizes at a lower baseline. These changes are not dangerous within the spacecraft, but they fundamentally alter how the body responds to exertion, stress, and injury. The idea of pushing oneself physically becomes obsolete. The body no longer expects to be tested by terrain, weather, or sudden bursts of effort. Over many decades, the immune system becomes increasingly specialized for a narrow range of threats. In the controlled environment of the ship, exposure to bacteria and viruses is limited and predictable. The immune system responds by conserving energy. Certain immune pathways weaken from lack of use. Others become hypersensitive, occasionally mistaking harmless particles for danger. Autoimmune responses may increase, not dramatically but persistently, adding low-level inflammation to daily life. Illness becomes rare, but when it occurs, recovery is slower, less decisive. Radiation exposure continues quietly year after year. Even with advanced shielding, cosmic rays and high-energy particles penetrate tissue at random. Each impact is insignificant on its own. Together, over decades, they alter the cellular landscape of the body. DNA repair mechanisms work continuously, but perfection is impossible. Mutations accumulate, not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to shift probabilities. The risk of cancer becomes a background constant, an invisible companion rather than a looming threat. Aging accelerates at the cellular level, even as the absence of physical strain preserves certain outward functions. The nervous system adapts to a life without urgency. On Earth, the brain evolved to respond to sudden danger, complex social interaction, and constant environmental variation. In space, these demands fade. The brain reallocates resources, reflexes slow slightly, emotional responses flatten. This is not depression or numbness, but efficiency. The brain learns that extreme reactions are rarely required. Calm becomes the default state, not through discipline, but through adaptation. Over time, sensory processing changes. Vision adjusts to artificial lighting and confined spaces. Depth perception becomes less important. Peripheral awareness narrows. Hearing adapts to a consistent soundscape of ventilation, machinery, and silence. Smell dulls, not from damage, but from monotony. Taste becomes less precise. The senses no longer scan the environment for novelty. They monitor it for consistency. Memory also changes. Without seasonal cycles, holidays, weather, or large social events, the brain loses many of the temporal markers it uses to organize time. Years pass without clear psychological boundaries. The past compresses. The future feels abstract. Memories of Earth become increasingly symbolic, less tied to sensory detail and more to emotional tone. The traveler may remember Earth as a feeling rather than a place. Dreams grow more elaborate. With fewer external stimuli, the mind turns inward. Dreams blend memory, imagination, and abstract thought. Some nights feel long and vivid, others pass without recall. Over decades, the line between dreaming and waking imagination softens. The brain spends more time constructing internal worlds, not as escapism, but as a natural response to sensory limitation. The endocrine system continues to adjust. Stress hormones settle into a low, steady pattern. The body no longer experiences the sharp hormonal spikes associated with danger, competition, or social conflict. Reproductive hormones decline gradually. Fertility decreases not abruptly, but as a consequence of radiation exposure, isolation, and the body's interpretation of its environment. The body learns that survival takes priority over reproduction. Legacy becomes psychological rather than biological. Skin and connective tissue change slowly. Without sunlight, vitamin synthesis must be managed artificially. Skin becomes thinner, more sensitive, less resilient. Wounds heal, but more slowly. Scars fade less completely. Hair growth patterns shift. These are not dramatic changes, but they accumulate, subtly altering appearance and sensation. Over many years, the gut microbiome simplifies further. Diversity declines. Digestion becomes efficient but less flexible. Foods that once caused no issue may now trigger discomfort. The relationship between gut and brain evolves, influencing mood and cognition in ways that are difficult to separate from isolation itself. Emotional states become quieter but also more internalized. Social interaction, if present, takes on a different character. In a small, closed group, relationships stabilize. Conflict becomes rare not because tension disappears, but because the cost of conflict is too high. The brain learns to suppress behaviors that threaten the group's stability. Emotional expression becomes measured, silence becomes comfortable, the body's stress responses adjust accordingly, reinforcing calm as a survival strategy. As decades accumulate, aging becomes perceptible in new ways. The body shows signs of wear not from use but from time. Muscles remain capable but lack explosive strength. Bones feel light. The heart beats steadily but without reserve. The immune system protects but cautiously. The nervous system functions smoothly but without urgency. The body has not failed. It has adapted precisely to its environment. At this stage of the journey, the human body is no longer a visitor in space. It is a resident. It has been reshaped by long-term exposure to artificial gravity substitutes, recycled air, controlled light, and isolation. The changes are not reversible without extreme intervention. Earth is no longer the default setting. The body continues because that is what living systems do. It adjusts, conserves, and stabilizes. It becomes something that could survive 100 years not by resisting space, but by accepting it completely. And as this acceptance deepens, the question shifts from whether the body can survive such a journey to whether survival itself still means the same thing it once did. As the voyage moves deeper into its long arc, the human body reaches a point where adaptation is no longer about coping with space, but about existing entirely within it. Decades have passed. The body no longer compares its condition to life on Earth because Earth has become an abstract reference, more concept than environment. What once felt like temporary adjustments have settled into a stable, altered baseline. The body is not failing, it is functioning exactly as required for the reality it inhabits. By this stage, muscle and bone are no longer in decline. They have reached a new equilibrium. The body has learned precisely how much strength is necessary to move, stabilize, and perform daily tasks in a low-gravity environment. Any excess tissue has long since been reabsorbed. This efficiency feels natural now. Movements are smooth, deliberate, almost economical. There is no wasted effort. The body no longer braces itself against gravity when turning, reaching, or resting. It floats into motion, conserving energy instinctively. The skeletal system reflects this long-term adaptation. Bones have reshaped themselves internally, not visibly warped, but altered in density and internal structure. They are lighter, less rigid, but also less tolerant of stress outside their environment. The body no longer prepares for impact, because impact does not exist here. If gravity were suddenly reintroduced, the skeleton would struggle, not from weakness alone, but from unfamiliarity. The body has forgotten how to live under weight. The cardiovascular system has fully embraced its new operating conditions. Blood flows efficiently in a body that no longer distinguishes between up and down. The heart beats steadily, without the peaks and valleys once caused by exertion, stress, or posture. This consistency creates a sense of calm within the body. The heart no longer races or strains. It works quietly, predictably, adapted to a life where emergencies are rare and effort is measured. Breathing changes subtly as well. Without gravity pulling air downward into the lungs, gas exchange becomes more uniform. Breaths feel shallower but more continuous. The body no longer associates breathing with exertion. It becomes an automatic background process, barely noticed unless attention is drawn to it. Oxygen levels remain stable, but the sensation of breath shifts, becoming less rhythmic, more ambient. The immune system has now settled into a long-term pattern of conservation. It no longer maintains a wide arsenal of defenses. Instead, it focuses on a narrow range of known risks. This makes it efficient, but also fragile in the face of the unexpected. A new pathogen introduced at this stage could be devastating, not because the immune system is weak, but because it is specialized. It has learned that unpredictability is unlikely and has adjusted accordingly. Radiation exposure continues its quiet influence. By now, its effects are woven deeply into the body's cellular fabric. DNA repair mechanisms have worked continuously for decades. Cells with severe damage have been eliminated. Others persist with minor mutations that do not disrupt immediate function. The body carries a mosaic of cellular histories, each cell bearing the marks of random cosmic events that pass through unnoticed. Aging at the molecular level becomes more pronounced, even as outward signs remain subtle. The nervous system undergoes one of the most profound transformations during this phase. Neural pathways associated with rapid response, multitasking, and high alert states weaken from disuse. In their place, pathways associated with sustained attention, internal focus, and long-term planning strengthen. The brain becomes exceptionally good at maintaining a steady mental state for extended periods. Distraction fades, impulsivity diminishes. Thought becomes slower but more continuous, like a long, unbroken thread rather than a series of jumps. This shift in cognition changes how time is experienced. Days no longer feel discrete. Weeks blend together. Years pass without the psychological weight they once carried. The brain stops marking time through events and instead measures it through routine. This can feel peaceful but also disorienting. The sense of how long something has lasted becomes abstract. Memory organizes itself around internal states rather than external milestones. Emotional life continues, but it is quieter. Extreme emotions become rare. Joy manifests as contentment rather than excitement. Sadness becomes reflective rather than sharp. Fear loses its urgency. The emotional spectrum narrows, not because feelings disappear, but because the environment no longer triggers rapid shifts. The body learns that stability is the most valuable emotional state for survival in confinement. Social bonds, if present, evolve into something deeply interdependent. In a small group, relationships become less performative and more functional. There is little room for misunderstanding. Communication becomes precise, economical, often silent. The body's stress responses adapt to this environment by suppressing reactions that could threaten group cohesion. Over time, the presence of others becomes less stimulating and more grounding, like a constant background field rather than a source of novelty. Sensory perception continues to simplify. The brain no longer devotes significant resources to scanning the environment for change. Vision becomes attuned to subtle differences in light and movement within confined spaces. Hearing becomes selective, filtering out familiar mechanical sounds entirely. Touch becomes one of the most meaningful senses, grounding the body in physical reality through contact with surfaces, restraints, and other bodies. The absence of natural sensory variation reshapes imagination. With fewer external stimuli, the mind becomes a primary source of experience. Internal imagery grows richer. Memory and imagination blend seamlessly. The traveler may revisit the same internal landscapes repeatedly, refining them over time. These inner worlds are not escapes, but extensions of cognition, a way for the brain to remain active and engaged in an environment that offers little novelty. Sleep patterns stabilize into long, regular cycles. Without seasonal or environmental cues, sleep becomes deeply habitual. Dreams continue, often slow and expansive, reflecting the brain's inward focus. Nightmares become rare, replaced by abstract dreamscapes that mirror the monotony and continuity of waking life. The boundary between rest and wakefulness softens, creating a sense of constant, low-level awareness. The endocrine system reflects this stability. Hormone levels flatten, stress hormones remain low, growth-related hormones decline steadily. The body invests little energy in change and more in maintenance. Healing still occurs, but slowly. Regeneration gives way to preservation. The body's priorities are clear: survive, remain functional, avoid disruption. As aging progresses, the signs are subtle but unmistakable. Hair thins, skin loses elasticity, reaction times slow slightly. But these changes do not feel alarming. They occur in an environment where comparison to others is limited and where external validation has little relevance. Aging becomes a private process, experienced internally rather than socially. By this point in the journey, the human body is no longer oriented toward Earth or any planet at all. It is oriented toward continuity. It has adapted not just physically but conceptually to the idea that movement through space is constant and destination is abstract. The body exists not as a traveller passing through space, but as a system embedded within it. The idea of arrival loses emotional weight. The body no longer prepares for change, it prepares for continuation. Survival is no longer defined by reaching somewhere else, but by maintaining balance within the environment that exists now. At this stage, the human body represents a version of humanity shaped not by gravity, climate, or landscape, but by time, isolation, and consistency. It is still human, but human in a way that has never existed before. A body adapted not to a world, but to a journey itself. As the journey continues beyond the midpoint of its long passage, the human body enters a phase where change is no longer noticeable in short spans at all. Years pass without any single moment feeling different from the one before it. The body no longer experiences adaptation as a process. Adaptation has become the background state of existence. What remains is slow drift, measured not in symptoms or sensations, but in subtle recalibrations that only become visible across decades. At this stage, the body's relationship with effort has changed fundamentally. Physical exertion no longer carries the meaning it once did. There is no uphill, no downhill, no terrain to overcome. Effort becomes internal rather than external, defined by maintaining routines rather than responding to challenges. Exercise is still performed, but it feels ritualistic, almost symbolic. An act done not because the body demands it instinctively, but because memory and protocol insist it matters. Muscles respond, but without urgency. Strength is maintained at a level sufficient for survival, not performance. The idea of pushing the body beyond its comfort zone fades, replaced by a careful avoidance of strain. The skeleton continues to exist in its reduced gravity equilibrium. Bones do not continue to weaken indefinitely. Instead, they stabilize at a density appropriate for a world without weight. This stabilization creates a strange paradox. The body feels capable and functional within its environment, yet deeply incompatible with Earth. Gravity, once a constant companion, would now be a threat. The body has become specialized, not damaged. It is no longer built for versatility. It is built for one condition only. The cardiovascular system reflects this specialization. The heart has become efficient but reserved. It no longer carries excess capacity for emergencies that never come. Blood vessels have adjusted their elasticity to a low-pressure system. Circulation is smooth, consistent, and predictable. Sudden changes in posture no longer exist, and with them, the body's ability to rapidly adjust blood flow has diminished. The concept of getting used to something physically no longer applies. The body already exists in its most familiar state. Breathing follows a similar pattern. Respiration is steady, shallow, and almost meditative. Without gravity influencing airflow, the sensation of breathing becomes less pronounced. The chest rises and falls, but the body pays little attention to it. Oxygen exchange remains sufficient, but the experience of breath loses its emotional weight. Breathing no longer signals exertion, relief, or stress. It simply happens. Over many decades, the immune system's quiet specialization begins to show its limitations. Minor infections, once easily dismissed, now linger longer. Inflammation becomes a chronic, low-level presence rather than an acute response. Healing is reliable but slow. The body no longer rushes to repair itself. It prioritizes stability over speed. This makes recovery steady but incomplete. Scars persist. Sensitivity increases. The body accepts imperfection as part of endurance. radiation continues to shape the body invisibly. By now, the cumulative exposure has altered the statistical landscape of cellular behavior. Many cells carry small genetic changes that do not disrupt daily function, but subtly alter long-term resilience. The body compensates by increasing surveillance and repair, but this constant effort consumes resources. Energy that might have gone into regeneration instead goes into maintenance. Aging becomes a matter of cellular bookkeeping rather than visible decline. The nervous system, deeply reshaped by decades of confinement and consistency, now operates in a mode that prioritizes continuity over reaction. Neural plasticity remains, but it is directed inward. The brain becomes less responsive to sudden stimuli and more sensitive to internal fluctuations. Small changes in routine or environment feel more significant than they once would have. The mind has adapted to predictability so completely that unpredictability becomes disruptive. Attention becomes deep but narrow. The brain excels at sustained focus on a limited range of tasks. Multitasking feels unnatural. Rapid decision-making feels uncomfortable. Thought unfolds slowly, deliberately, often looping back on itself. This is not cognitive decline, it is cognitive specialization. The brain has optimized itself for a world that rarely demands immediate response. Memory continues to reorganize. Without frequent external markers, autobiographical memory becomes less detailed. The sequence of events blurs. What remains vivid are emotional states, internal reflections, and recurring experiences. Memories of Earth, now many decades old, lose their sensory sharpness. Colors fade, sounds soften, smells disappear. Earth becomes less a place and more a symbol, representing openness, unpredictability, and gravity rather than specific locations. Imagination fills the gaps left by sensory monotony. Internal narratives grow longer and more elaborate. The mind revisits imagined futures and alternate lives, not as longing, but as mental exercise. These imagined scenarios are not escapes. They're a way for the brain to remain active in an environment where novelty is scarce. Over time, imagined experiences can feel as emotionally real as remembered ones. Emotional life continues to flatten, but not into emptiness. Instead, emotions stretch out over longer durations. Contentment becomes a steady background rather than a fleeting moment. Discomfort becomes tolerable and diffuse. Anxiety becomes abstract, focused less on immediate threats and more on existential questions. The body's stress systems respond weakly to imagined danger and strongly to disruptions of routine. Social interaction, if present, becomes deeply patterned. Conversations repeat themes. Relationships settle into roles that rarely change. Conflict is managed quietly, often through avoidance rather than confrontation. The body's stress responses reinforce this stability. Elevated heart rate and cortisol spikes feel exhausting rather than energizing, encouraging calm and compromise. The endocrine system reflects this long-term stability. Hormone levels are low and consistent. Cycles associated with reproduction, growth, and competition diminish further. The body interprets its environment as one where expansion is unnecessary. Maintenance becomes the primary biological goal. This shift affects not only physical processes, but motivation itself. Ambition fades, curiosity remains, but it turns inward rather than outward. The skin, deprived of sunlight and natural variation, becomes more sensitive and fragile. Artificial lighting sustains basic function, but cannot fully replicate the complexity of solar exposure. Pigmentation changes, texture alters. The body protects itself carefully, aware that damage heals slowly. Touch becomes more significant, grounding the body in physical reality when other sensory inputs are limited. Sleep deepens into a stable rhythm. Without external cues, the body relies entirely on internal clocks. These clocks become precise but inflexible. Disruptions to sleep feel more profound than they once did. Dreams continue, often slow and expansive, reflecting the mind's internal focus. Night and day lose their emotional distinction. Rest and wakefulness blend into a continuous state of awareness. As aging progresses, the body's limitations become more apparent but less alarming. But decline is gradual and expected. The absence of social comparison reduces anxiety about aging. There is no mirror reflecting societal standards. The body ages privately, measured only against its own past. By this stage, the human body has become something that could not easily exist anywhere else. It is no longer adapted for Earth, but not fragile within space. It is a product of its environment, shaped by absence, duration, and consistency. Survival no longer feels like an achievement. It feels like a default state. The journey itself has become the environment. The body no longer waits for arrival. It no longer prepares for change. It exists in a continuous present, sustained by routine, adaptation, and quiet resilience. What began as a voyage has become a way of being. As the journey moves further into its long, uninterrupted span, the human body reaches a stage where time no longer feels like something passing through it, but something the body itself has absorbed. Decades of consistent conditions have reshaped not only physiology, but expectation. The body no longer anticipates change, improvement, or challenge. It anticipates continuity. This shift alters how every system behaves because anticipation is deeply woven into biology. On Earth, the body is constantly preparing for what might happen next. Here, preparation fades, replaced by preservation. At this stage, physical movement becomes highly refined. Every motion is efficient, minimal, and intentional. The body has learned exactly how much effort is required to accomplish tasks in a weightless environment and never exceeds it. Even gestures become smaller. The muscles involved in fine motor control remain relatively strong, while larger muscle groups settle into a steady, low-demand state. The body feels light not only because gravity is absent, but because it no longer carries excess tension. There is no bracing, no impact, no anticipation of resistance. The spine, freed from constant compression, has settled into an elongated form. Intervertebral spaces remain slightly expanded compared to life on Earth. This creates subtle changes in posture and sensation. The body no longer associates the spine with load-bearing or strain. Back pain, once common on Earth, becomes rare, replaced by a different kind of discomfort related to prolonged stillness and repetition rather than stress. The body learns that discomfort now comes from sameness, not effort. Joint structures adapt as well. Without gravity pulling joints together, connective tissues change their resting tension. Joints become more flexible in some directions and less stable in others. The body compensates by relying on controlled movement rather than force. This creates a style of motion that feels almost fluid, as if the body is moving through itself rather than through space. Sudden movements feel unnecessary and even risky, so the body avoids them instinctively. The cardiovascular system continues its quiet efficiency. Heart rate variability narrows, peaks and valleys smooth out. The heart becomes a metronome rather than a drum. This consistency supports survival, but it also limits adaptability. If a sudden emergency were to occur, the body would struggle to mount a rapid response. It has learned that extremes are unlikely, and it has reorganized itself accordingly. Blood chemistry reflects this long-term stability. Hormones associated with alertness and stress remain low. Inflammatory markers hover at mild, persistent levels. The body exists in a state of controlled compromise, not optimal for peak performance, but ideal for endurance. This state is not uncomfortable. It is simply different from the dynamic balance of life on Earth. The immune system, now deeply conservative, behaves almost like a librarian rather than a warrior. It catalogues threats rather than reacting aggressively. This reduces damage from overreaction, but increases vulnerability to novelty. The body has learned that novelty is rare, and it treats it accordingly. The immune system no longer rehearses for unknown dangers. It focuses on maintaining order. Radiation exposure continues to shape long-term health in subtle ways. At this point, its influence is less about specific diseases and more about overall resilience. Cells age unevenly. Some tissues remain surprisingly functional, while others show signs of accelerated decline. The body becomes a patchwork of cellular histories, each region reflecting a slightly different relationship with time and exposure. This unevenness does not cause immediate failure, but it reduces the margin for recovery. The nervous system, having long since adapted to confinement and consistency, now shows signs of deep specialization. Neural circuits associated with curiosity, exploration, and novelty seeking are quieter. Circuits associated with pattern recognition, prediction, and internal monitoring are highly active. The brain becomes exceptionally good at maintaining equilibrium. It notices small deviations in routine immediately. Minor disruptions feel larger than they objectively are because the brain has become finely tuned to stability. This tuning affects perception of risk. The body no longer reacts strongly to abstract danger. Instead, it reacts strongly to disruptions of habit. A malfunction in familiar equipment may trigger more anxiety than the idea of distant hazards. The body has learned that survival depends not on confronting threats, but on maintaining systems. Memory continues to reorganize itself around internal landmarks. Instead of remembering years as collections of events, the brain remembers them as phases of feeling. There may be long stretches of memory defined by a particular emotional tone or mental state, rather than by specific occurrences. Time feels both compressed and expanded, depending on attention. A single day can feel long and detailed, while a decade can feel distant and indistinct. Language use subtly changes over long durations. Vocabulary narrows to match environment and routine. Words related to weather, crowds, travel, and nature fade from daily use. New meanings attach themselves to words related to machinery, cycles, maintenance, and timing. The body and brain adapt not just physically, but linguistically, reshaping how reality is described internally. Emotional expression becomes increasingly internalized. The body learns that overt expression is unnecessary and sometimes disruptive. Feelings are processed quietly, often through thought rather than action. This does not eliminate emotion, but it changes how it is experienced. Emotions feel less like waves and more like slow shifts in background pressure. Social identity becomes less distinct over time. Without large communities or external reference points, roles blur. The body no longer signals status through posture, movement, or display. Hierarchies flatten. Interaction becomes cooperative by necessity rather than choice. The stress systems of the body support this by reducing competitive impulses. The body no longer prepares for rivalry, it prepares for coexistence. The endocrine system continues its long descent into maintenance mode. Hormones related to growth, reproduction, and competition remain low. The body interprets its environment as one where expansion would be inefficient. Energy is directed towards cellular repair and system stability. This creates a sense of physical calm that persists even during minor disruptions. Skin, hair, and nails reflect the long-term effects of artificial environments. Without sunlight and environmental variation, skin becomes thinner and more uniform in tone. Hair growth slows, nails grow more brittle. These changes are not painful, but they reinforce the sense that the body is aging in a way that feels detached from seasons or milestones. Aging becomes abstract, measured only by internal sensation. Sleep remains regular and predictable. Without external cues, the body relies entirely on internal rhythms. These rhythms become strong but inflexible. Changes in schedule are felt deeply. The body prefers consistency over optimization. Dreams continue to reflect the mind's inward focus, often featuring slow movement, repetition, or symbolic imagery rather than narrative action. As the body continues to age, its limitations become more noticeable but also more accepted. Pain is rare, but stiffness is common. Fatigue appears not as exhaustion but as a gentle narrowing of energy. The body learns to pace itself instinctively, avoiding strain without conscious effort. At this point in the journey, the human body has become deeply specialized for existence within a closed system. It no longer expects rescue, arrival, or return. Survival is no longer defined by progress toward a goal, but by maintenance of balance. The body exists not in anticipation of the future, but in alignment with the present. This alignment does not feel tragic. It feels neutral. The body has learned that life can continue without expansion, without novelty, without constant stimulation. It has learned that endurance is not dramatic. It is quiet. What began as a journey through space has become a journey through time itself, and the human body has reshaped itself to move through that time with as little friction as possible. As the journey extends deeper into its second half, the human body enters a phase where even adaptation becomes subtle, almost imperceptible. The most dramatic changes have already taken place. What remains is a slow refinement, a continual fine-tuning of systems that have learned to survive not by reacting, but by remaining steady. The body is no longer adjusting to space as an environment. Space has become the baseline against which all internal processes are calibrated. At this stage, physical sensations are muted compared to life on Earth. Not dulled, but smoothed. The body rarely experiences sharp contrasts. There is little pain, little sudden pleasure, little urgency. Sensations unfold gradually, like long fades rather than abrupt signals. This alters how the body interprets its own condition. Discomfort is recognized intellectually before it is felt emotionally. Fatigue arrives as a quiet narrowing of energy rather than a heavy weight. Hunger is steady and predictable, no longer spiking or dropping sharply. Muscle tone remains stable but minimal. The body has learned exactly how much muscle mass is necessary to perform its daily functions, and maintains little beyond that. Exercise continues, but it feels less like training and more like preservation. Movements are slow, controlled, almost meditative. The body avoids unnecessary acceleration instinctively, conserving energy not because resources are scarce, but because effort itself has become less meaningful. The skeletal system, now fully adapted to long-term low gravity, exists in a delicate balance. Bones are no longer weakening, but they are no longer reinforcing themselves either. The internal structure of bone has reorganized to distribute stress differently, favoring flexibility over rigidity. This makes the body feel less brittle within its environment, yet profoundly unsuited to gravity. The idea of standing under one's own weight has become foreign, almost inconceivable at a bodily level. The cardiovascular system operates with quiet consistency. Heart rate remains steady for long periods, rarely spiking. Blood pressure is low and stable. The body no longer experiences the internal drama of exertion followed by recovery. Instead, circulation feels continuous and even. This consistency creates a sense of internal calm that permeates daily life. The body feels supported by its own rhythms rather than challenged by them. Respiration follows this same pattern. Breathing is shallow but constant, rarely drawing attention to itself. The body no longer associates breath with effort or relief. It becomes part of the background of awareness, like the hum of the ship itself. The lungs function efficiently, but without the dynamic range they once had. The sensation of catching one's breath has disappeared from lived experience. The immune system continues its conservative strategy. It remains alert to known risks but slow to respond to unfamiliar ones. Infections are rare, but when they occur, recovery is prolonged. The body no longer rushes to heal. It responds cautiously, prioritizing stability over speed. This slow response is not a failure. It is an adaptation to an environment where sudden threats are unlikely, but long-term balance is essential. Radiation remains a constant, invisible influence. At this point, its effects are deeply integrated into the body's aging process. Cells show increasing variability in function. Some tissues age faster than others, creating subtle asymmetries. The body compensates by redistributing resources, favoring vital systems over peripheral ones. This triage is not conscious but biological. The body learns where to invest its remaining resilience. The nervous system, shaped by decades of low stimulation and high predictability, becomes exceptionally sensitive to internal changes. Small shifts in mood, energy, or routine are noticed quickly. External stimuli, by contrast, feel less compelling. The brain has turned inward, monitoring the body and mind more closely than the environment. This inward focus supports long-term survival, but it also deepens introspection. Attention is sustained but narrow. The mind is capable of focusing on a single task or line of thought for extended periods without fatigue. However, switching tasks feels more taxing than it once did. Multitasking becomes uncomfortable. The brain prefers continuity over variety. Thought patterns loop gently, revisiting familiar ideas rather than seeking new ones. This preference shapes creativity in unexpected ways. Creativity does not vanish, but it slows. Instead of producing bursts of novelty, the mind refines existing ideas repeatedly. Imagination becomes iterative rather than exploratory. The same mental landscapes are revisited and subtly altered over time. These internal worlds become rich, detailed, and emotionally significant, even if they are rarely shared. Memory continues to compress. Long stretches of time blur together, especially when routines remain unchanged. The body remembers not what happened, but how it felt. Emotional states become the primary anchors of memory. The traveler may recall decades as a single extended mood rather than a sequence of events. This does not feel like loss, it feels like simplification. Emotions themselves are stable but subdued. The body rarely experiences extremes. Happiness becomes contentment. Sadness becomes quiet reflection. Fear becomes abstract, detached from immediate physical response. The stress response has been trained out of the body through disuse. Cortisol spikes are rare and uncomfortable, encouraging behaviors that restore calm as quickly as possible. Social dynamics, if present, have settled into deep equilibrium. Interactions are predictable and gentle. Conflict is avoided not through suppression, but through a shared understanding that stability is essential. The body's physiological responses reinforce this. Elevated heart rate and adrenaline feel unpleasant, signaling that confrontation is counterproductive. Cooperation becomes the path of least resistance. Identity continues to evolve. Without external reference points, the sense of self becomes more internal and less performative. The body no longer signals identity through appearance, movement, or social cues. Identity becomes a quiet narrative maintained internally, shaped by memory and reflection rather than by interaction. The traveler may feel less like a character in a story and more like an observer of ongoing experience. The endocrine system reflects this inward turn. Hormones related to competition, reproduction, and growth remain low. Hormones related to maintenance and repair dominate. The body exists in a state optimized for longevity rather than achievement. This creates a physical sense of calm that persists even during uncertainty. Skin and connective tissue continue to show the effects of artificial living. Skin is thin, sensitive, and slow to heal. Touch becomes one of the most meaningful sensory experiences, grounding the body in physical reality. Even brief contact with surfaces or other bodies carries emotional weight, reminding the nervous system of presence and continuity. Sleep becomes deeply ingrained. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Without external disruption, sleep cycles become long and regular. Dreams reflect the mind's inward focus, often abstract, symbolic, and slow. The boundary between dreaming and waking thought continues to soften, creating a sense of continuous consciousness rather than discrete states. As aging progresses, physical decline becomes noticeable but manageable. Strength fades gently. Coordination remains good within the limits of the environment. The body learns to move carefully, avoiding unnecessary risk. Falls are rare, not because the body is strong, but because it has learned not to challenge itself. At this stage, the human body has become a system optimized for endurance within a closed world. It no longer anticipates arrival or return. The concept of destination has lost its emotional weight. What matters is continuity, balance, and the maintenance of systems that support life. The journey has ceased to feel like a passage through space. It feels like a condition of existence. The body has learned that survival does not require constant adaptation, only constant alignment with the present. Time continues to pass, but the body experiences it not as movement, but as a steady, unbroken flow. In this phase, the human body reveals something fundamental about itself. It is not defined by speed, strength, or expansion. It is defined by its ability to settle into new realities and continue quietly, reshaping itself until survival feels natural again, even in a place it was never meant to be. As the journey stretches further toward its later decades, the human body enters a phase where endurance is no longer an active effort but a passive state. Survival does not feel earned each day, it feels assumed. The body wakes, moves, eats, rests, and continues without questioning its own continuation. This quiet certainty marks a profound shift because on Earth, the body is constantly reminded of its vulnerability through fatigue, illness, pain, and environmental challenge. Here, vulnerability still exists, but it no longer announces itself loudly. It becomes background, a low, steady presence rather than an urgent signal. By now, the body's relationship with movement has become almost ceremonial. Every action follows familiar pathways. The body does not explore new ways of moving because there is no need to. Muscles respond predictably, joints move within narrow ranges, and posture remains consistent day after day. This repetition does not feel restrictive, it feels stabilizing. The body has learned that predictability reduces risk, and it has embraced it fully. The absence of gravity has long since been normalized. The body no longer experiences floating as unusual or even noticeable. Orientation has become conceptual rather than physical. Up and down exist only as reference points defined by the spacecraft's layout. The inner ear, once critical for balance, now plays a minimal role in daily life. Motion sickness is a distant memory. The vestibular system has recalibrated so completely that gravity itself would feel disorienting if reintroduced. This recalibration affects spatial awareness in subtle ways. The body no longer anticipates falling. It no longer braces for impact. This changes how caution is expressed. Instead of preparing for sudden loss of balance, the body prepares for gradual drift and collision with surfaces. Movements are planned with care, not urgency. Even reflexes have slowed, not from damage but from irrelevance. The skeletal system continues to function within its specialized equilibrium. Bones are light, resilient within low gravity, but fundamentally incompatible with weight-bearing environments. The body no longer produces the micro-adjustments that once reinforced bone strength. Instead, it relies on controlled movement and careful handling. The idea of physical resilience shifts from strength to avoidance of stress. The cardiovascular system remains one of the most stable aspects of the body at this stage. The heart beats steadily, rarely deviating from its baseline rhythm. Blood pressure remains low, circulation is smooth and consistent. The body rarely experiences dizziness, strain, or palpitations. This stability feels reassuring, but it also reflects a loss of adaptability. The heart no longer trains for extremes. It has optimized itself for one condition only. Breathing continues as a quiet, unnoticed process. Without exertion or gravity influencing airflow, respiration becomes deeply automatic. The body rarely takes deep breaths unless consciously prompted. Oxygen exchange remains sufficient, but the sensation of breathing loses its emotional significance. Breath is no longer associated with relief, excitement, or stress. It is simply present. The immune system, now fully committed to its conservative strategy, shows signs of long-term wear, not collapse, but fatigue. The constant low-level management of cellular damage and occasional inflammation consumes resources. Healing is reliable but slow. Minor injuries linger. The body no longer rushes to restore itself to a pristine state. It accepts small imperfections as part of continued function. Radiation exposure continues to influence aging in complex ways. By this point, the body carries a history of countless microscopic impacts. These have not produced immediate catastrophe, but they have shaped the body's long-term resilience. Some tissues show accelerated aging, others remain surprisingly preserved. This unevenness creates subtle imbalances in sensation and function, but the body compensates quietly, redistributing effort where needed. The nervous system, shaped by decades of low stimulation and high consistency, now operates in a mode that prioritizes internal regulation over external engagement. The brain monitors the body closely, adjusting sleep, appetite and mood to maintain equilibrium. External events feel less significant than internal shifts. The mind has become a caretaker rather than an explorer. This inward focus changes how the body experiences boredom. Boredom no longer feels like restlessness or dissatisfaction. It feels like emptiness that the mind gently fills with thought. The brain no longer demands novelty. It creates continuity. Long stretches of time can pass without discomfort, filled by internal dialogue, memory, and imagination. Memory itself continues to evolve. The brain increasingly stores experiences as patterns rather than narratives. Events are remembered not for their sequence, but for their emotional tone and relevance to routine. The distinction between days, months, and years blurs further. Time feels circular rather than linear, defined by repetition rather than progression. Emotional responses remain muted but present. The body still experiences affection, attachment, and concern, but these emotions unfold slowly. Sudden emotional surges feel foreign and uncomfortable. The body prefers emotional states that can be sustained over long periods without fluctuation. Calm becomes the most valued emotional condition, not consciously but biologically. Social interaction, if ongoing, has reached a deep equilibrium. Roles are well established. Expectations are clear, communication is efficient and often non-verbal. The body's stress systems discourage confrontation. Even disagreement feels exhausting. Cooperation is not a moral choice. It is a physiological preference reinforced by decades of adaptation. Identity continues to internalize. Without external validation or comparison, the sense of self becomes quiet and introspective. The body no longer expresses identity through style, movement, or social display. Identity becomes a narrative maintained internally, shaped by memory, thought, and habit. The traveler may feel less defined as a person and more as a presence within an ongoing process. The endocrine system remains firmly in maintenance mode. Hormones related to ambition, competition, and reproduction are minimal. Hormones related to repair and stability dominate. This creates a persistent sense of physical neutrality. The body rarely feels driven or restless. Motivation arises from necessity rather than desire. Skin and connective tissues continue to reflect long-term artificial living. Skin remains thin and sensitive. Minor abrasions heal slowly. The body treats its surface carefully, aware that damage carries long-lasting consequences. Touch becomes deeply meaningful, providing reassurance of physical existence in an environment where sensory input is limited. Sleep remains one of the most stable aspects of life. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Dreams are frequent but subdued, often abstract rather than narrative. The mind explores internal spaces rather than reenacting external experiences. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness continues to soften, creating a sense of continuous awareness. As aging advances, the body's limitations become more pronounced but also more integrated. Strength fades gently, coordination remains sufficient for daily tasks. The body learns to move carefully, conserving energy and avoiding risk. Decline feels gradual and manageable, not alarming. At this stage of the journey, the human body has fully transitioned from a state of adaptation to a state of persistence. It no longer changes dramatically. It simply continues, maintaining balance within a narrow range of conditions. The journey itself has become invisible, experienced not as movement through space but as the quiet passage of time. The body has learned that survival in such an environment does not require constant effort or vigilance. It requires alignment, consistency, and restraint. This realization is written not in thought but in physiology. The body exists as a system optimized not for exploration but for endurance. In this phase, the human body reveals a quiet truth. Life does not need variety to continue. It needs stability, and given enough time, the body will reshape itself to find that stability even in the most unnatural environments, carrying on not with resistance, but with acceptance. As the journey moves deeper into its later decades, the human body enters a state where continuity itself becomes the defining feature of existence. Change has slowed to such a degree that it is no longer felt as progression, but as background drift. The body does not experience itself as aging in any dramatic way. Instead, it experiences itself as remaining. Each day feels structurally similar to the one before it, and this sameness reshapes how biology interprets time, effort, and meaning. At this stage, the body's internal signals have become extremely refined. Small fluctuations in energy, hydration, or routine are detected quickly because there are so few competing signals. On Earth, the body constantly filters noise, temperature changes, social stress, movement, environmental hazards. Here, noise has been removed. What remains is clarity, but also sensitivity. Minor deviations feel larger, not because they are dangerous, but because the body has become finely tuned to equilibrium. Movement continues to be deliberate and economical. The body no longer improvises motion. Every action follows established patterns that minimize risk and conserve energy. The muscles that remain active are those required for precision and control rather than force. The hands and forearms remain relatively strong, capable of delicate manipulation. The legs and core exist in a state of maintenance, sufficient for stabilization but no longer expressive of power. The absence of gravity has fully rewritten the body's intuitive understanding of weight and resistance. The body no longer anticipates heaviness. Objects are handled differently, with care not to over-apply force. The sensation of mass becomes intellectual rather than instinctive. The body has learned that momentum, not weight, is the primary factor governing interaction. This changes how movement feels at a fundamental level. The skeletal system remains stable within its specialized configuration. Bones are light, flexible, and vulnerable outside their environment, but fully functional within it. The body does not perceive its skeleton as weak because weakness is defined relative to demands that no longer exist. The skeleton supports the body adequately in a world without gravity, and that is enough. The idea of structural strength has been redefined. The cardiovascular system continues its steady rhythm. The heart beats reliably, rarely challenged. Blood flows evenly, without dramatic redistribution. The body no longer experiences the sensation of exertion followed by recovery. Instead, circulation feels constant, almost invisible. This consistency creates a subtle sense of safety, reinforcing the body's preference for predictability. Respiration remains quiet and unremarkable. Breathing is no longer linked to emotional states. Excitement, fear, and anticipation rarely alter breathing patterns. The lungs operate efficiently but without dynamic range. The body rarely draws deep breaths unless consciously prompted. Breath has become a background process rather than a felt experience. The immune system continues its long-term balancing act. It is neither weak nor aggressive. It operates slowly, deliberately, responding to threats only when necessary. This conservatism reduces collateral damage but increases recovery time. Minor infections linger, resolved eventually rather than decisively. The body accepts this trade-off as part of long-term survival. Radiation exposure remains an unchanging aspect of the environment. By now, its influence is inseparable from aging itself. Cellular damage accumulates unevenly, creating a mosaic of resilience and vulnerability across tissues. The body compensates by prioritizing function over perfection. Some cells operate less efficiently, but the system as a whole remains viable. The nervous system has become deeply inward-focused. External stimuli no longer command immediate attention. The brain allocates most of its resources to monitoring internal states and maintaining equilibrium. This inward turn does not feel isolating, it feels sufficient. The mind no longer seeks stimulation, it seeks continuity. Attention spans have lengthened dramatically. The brain can remain focused on a single task or thought for extended periods without fatigue. However, switching contexts feels effortful. The mind prefers to remain within familiar cognitive landscapes rather than explore new ones. This preference reinforces routine and discourages novelty. Memory continues to compress time. Long stretches of experience blend together. The body remembers phases of existence rather than sequences of events. Emotional tone becomes the primary marker of memory. The traveler may recall entire decades as calm, reflective, or neutral without being able to distinguish individual moments within them. Imagination remains active, but it is no longer expansive. It circles familiar themes, refining them over time. The mind revisits the same ideas repeatedly, each time viewing them from a slightly different angle. This iterative imagination provides mental stimulation without requiring external input. Emotional responses remain stable and subdued. The body rarely experiences intense joy or sorrow. Emotions unfold slowly and persist gently. Sudden emotional shifts feel disruptive rather than engaging. The body has learned that emotional volatility consumes energy and introduces risk. Calm has become the preferred emotional state. Social interaction, if present, has become deeply habitual. Conversations follow predictable patterns. Silence is comfortable. The body no longer expects novelty from others. Relationships are defined by reliability rather than excitement. This creates a sense of security, but also a narrowing of emotional range. Identity has become almost entirely internal, without external markers such as social roles, fashion, or changing environments. The sense of self is maintained through memory and thought. The body no longer expresses identity through physical presence. Identity exists as an internal narrative, quietly maintained. The endocrine system remains oriented toward preservation. Hormones associated with growth, reproduction, and competition remain low. Hormones associated with maintenance and repair dominate. The body exists in a steady, low-energy state, optimized for longevity rather than achievement. Skin continues to thin and lose resilience. The absence of sunlight and environmental variation accelerates these changes. The body protects its surface carefully, avoiding injury whenever possible. Touch remains one of the few sensations that consistently ground the body in physical reality. Sleep remains regular and deeply ingrained. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Dreams are slow and abstract, often reflecting internal states rather than external narratives. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness continues to blur, creating a sense of continuous consciousness. As aging progresses, decline remains gradual and manageable. The body feels slower but not broken. Coordination remains sufficient. Strength is minimal but adequate. The body has learned how to live within its limits without constantly testing them. At this stage of the journey, the human body has become a system optimized for persistence within a closed world. It no longer prepares for arrival, return, or rescue. The idea of destination has lost meaning. What matters is balance, routine, and the maintenance of systems that support life. The journey through space has become indistinguishable from the passage of time itself. The body experiences existence not as movement towards something else, but as continuous presence. Survival no longer feels like an achievement. It feels like the natural outcome of alignment with environment. In this phase, the human body demonstrates its deepest capacity, not strength, not speed, not intelligence, but the ability to reshape itself quietly until even the most unnatural conditions feel ordinary. As the journey moves towards its final third, the human body enters a stage where existence feels almost suspended in equilibrium, not frozen, not stagnant, but balanced so precisely that change becomes nearly invisible. The body no longer measures itself against what it once was, because comparison has lost relevance. Earth exists only as a distant abstraction, a memory that no longer carries physical authority. What remains is a body that has learned how to continue without expecting improvement, decline, or resolution. At this point, physical sensation is governed almost entirely by routine. The body wakes, moves, eats, rests, and sleeps with little conscious awareness of transition between states. These transitions have become seamless. Hunger arrives gradually and predictably. Fatigue emerges softly, without urgency. Pain is rare, but when it appears, it unfolds slowly, signaling adjustment rather than alarm. The body no longer reacts sharply because sharp reactions are inefficient in an environment defined by constancy. Movement is now fully ritualized. Every action follows an internal script refined over decades. The body no longer experiments with posture or technique. It relies on motions that have proven safe and sustainable. The muscles involved in daily tasks maintain enough tone to perform reliably, but no more. Excess strength would be wasted energy. The body has learned to value sufficiency over capacity. The absence of gravity has long since been integrated into the body's intuitive understanding of space. There is no anticipation of falling, no instinct to brace or catch oneself. Instead, the body anticipates drift, inertia, and gentle collision. This alters the psychology of movement. Motion is planned, slow, and deliberate. Sudden acceleration feels uncomfortable, even threatening, not because it is dangerous, but because it disrupts equilibrium. The skeletal system remains in its low-density equilibrium. Bones no longer remodel aggressively. The processes that once reinforced skeletal strength through stress have been quiet for decades. Instead, bones maintain a configuration optimized for low force and controlled movement. The body does not perceive fragility because fragility is defined relative to forces that no longer act upon it. Within its environment, the skeleton is adequate. The cardiovascular system continues to operate with quiet precision. The heart beats steadily, almost monotonously, without dramatic variation. Blood pressure remains low and consistent. The body rarely experiences the sensation of exertion. Physical effort no longer produces the familiar rise and fall of heart rate. Instead, circulation remains even, reinforcing a sense of internal calm that permeates daily experience. Breathing remains shallow and constant. The lungs function efficiently, but without the dynamic range once required by physical activity on Earth. The sensation of breath is faint, rarely entering conscious awareness. Breathing no longer signals emotional state. It no longer speeds with excitement or deepens with relief. It simply sustains. The immune system shows signs of long-term conservation. It continues to protect against known risks, but its responses are measured and slow. Inflammation persists at low levels, a background hum rather than an acute response. Healing remains possible, but it unfolds gradually. The body has learned that urgency is unnecessary and often counterproductive. Radiation exposure has now become inseparable from the body's aging process. The cumulative effect of countless microscopic interactions has altered cellular function unevenly. Some tissues show signs of advanced aging, others remain relatively preserved. The body compensates by reallocating resources, prioritizing systems essential for daily function. This redistribution is quiet and continuous, rarely felt consciously. The nervous system has reached a mature state of inward focus. External stimuli rarely demand immediate attention. The brain devotes most of its resources to monitoring internal states and maintaining balance. Thoughts unfold slowly, deliberately. Impulsivity has nearly vanished. The mind prefers continuity over novelty, reflection over reaction. Attention has become both deep and stable. The body can remain engaged in a single task or line of thought for extended periods without fatigue. However, switching focus feels increasingly taxing. The brain has become specialized for sustained attention rather than rapid adaptation. This specialization supports endurance but limits flexibility. Memory continues to compress experience. Long stretches of time blur together, especially when routines remain unchanged. The body remembers not events but states of being. Emotional tone becomes the primary anchor of memory. Entire decades may be remembered as calm, reflective, or neutral, without clear distinction between individual moments. Imagination persists, but it no longer seeks expansion. Instead, it refines familiar internal landscapes. The mind revisits the same ideas repeatedly, examining them from slightly different angles. This iterative process provides mental engagement without requiring external novelty. Creativity becomes a slow inward process rather than an outward expression. Emotional life remains stable and subdued. Strong emotions are rare and often uncomfortable. The body prefers emotional states that can be maintained without fluctuation. Contentment becomes the default, not as a peak experience, but as a steady background condition. Discomfort arises primarily from disruptions to routine rather than from external threats. Social interaction, if ongoing, has settled into a deeply predictable pattern. Conversations follow familiar paths. Silence is comfortable and often preferred. The body's stress systems discourage confrontation. Even disagreement feels physiologically draining. Cooperation and compromise are reinforced not by ideology, but by biology. Identity has become almost entirely internal. Without external comparison or validation, the sense of self is maintained through memory and reflection. The body no longer signals identity through movement, posture, or display. Identity exists as a quiet narrative that unfolds internally, largely unnoticed unless attention is directed toward it. The endocrine system remains firmly oriented toward maintenance. Hormones associated with growth, reproduction, and competition remain minimal. Hormones associated with repair and stability dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state, optimized for long-term survival rather than achievement or change. Skin and connective tissues continue to show signs of long-term artificial living. Skin remains thin and sensitive. Minor injuries heal slowly. The body treats its surface with care, avoiding damage whenever possible. Touch remains one of the most meaningful sensory experiences, grounding the body in physical reality. Sleep continues to be regular and deeply ingrained. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Dreams remain slow and abstract, often reflecting internal states rather than external narratives. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness remains soft, creating a sense of continuous awareness rather than distinct phases. As aging progresses, physical decline becomes more noticeable, but it is gradual and expected. Strength diminishes gently. Coordination remains sufficient for daily tasks. The body learns to move carefully, conserving energy and avoiding risk. Decline feels like narrowing rather than collapse. At this stage of the journey, the human body has fully transitioned from a state of adaptation to a state of persistence. It no longer prepares for arrival, return, or rescue. The idea of destination has lost emotional significance. What matters is balance, routine, and the maintenance of systems that support life. The journey through space has become indistinguishable from the passage of time itself. The body experiences existence not as movement towards something else, but as continuous presence. Survival no longer feels like an achievement. It feels inevitable. In this phase, the human body reveals a quiet truth about itself. It does not require constant challenge or stimulation to continue. Given enough time and consistency, it will reshape itself until even the most unnatural conditions feel ordinary, carrying on not through resistance but through alignment with what remains. As the voyage approaches its later decades, the human body enters a phase where the concept of long-term no longer feels meaningful. Time is no longer something the body measures in years or even in decades. It is experienced as a continuous present, a steady unfolding of days that differ only in the smallest details. The body does not feel as though it is moving through time. It feels as though time is moving gently through it. At this stage, biological systems have settled into their most economical configuration. Nothing in the body operates with excess capacity. Nothing is maintained just in case. Every system functions at a level that is sufficient for survival and no more. This efficiency is not the result of conscious discipline. It is the outcome of decades spent in an environment where waste, strain, and redundancy offer no advantage. Movement has become almost instinctively cautious. The body no longer explores its physical limits. It avoids sudden acceleration, abrupt changes in direction, and unnecessary exertion. This is not fear. It is a deeply learned understanding that stability preserves life. The muscles involved in everyday tasks continue to function reliably, but they no longer grow stronger or weaker. They exist in a narrow band of capability, tuned precisely to the demands of the environment. The absence of gravity has reshaped not only posture, but the body's sense of physical confidence. The body no longer expects resistance beneath its feet, or weight pressing down through its joints. Balance is no longer an active process. It is a passive state maintained by the environment itself. The inner ear, once essential for orientation, now plays a background role. Motion feels smooth and predictable, rarely surprising. The skeletal system remains stable within its specialized form. Bones no longer remodel aggressively, but they also no longer deteriorate rapidly. They exist in a steady state, light and flexible enough for low-gravity life, yet vulnerable to forces that no longer occur. The body does not feel fragile because fragility is defined by threats that are absent. Within its closed world, the skeleton is entirely sufficient. The cardiovascular system continues its quiet, unwavering rhythm. The heart beats steadily, rarely responding to changes in activity or emotion. Blood pressure remains low and consistent. The sensation of the heart working hard has long since faded from experience. This constancy contributes to a pervasive sense of calm within the body, reinforcing the idea that emergencies are unlikely and urgency is unnecessary. Breathing remains shallow and regular. The lungs operate efficiently without requiring deep inhalations or forceful exhalations. The body no longer associates breath with emotional states. Anxiety, excitement, and anticipation rarely alter breathing patterns. Respiration becomes a nearly invisible process, sustaining life without demanding attention. The immune system continues to function conservatively. It remains vigilant but slow. Inflammation exists at low levels, rarely spiking. Healing occurs, but at a measured pace. The body no longer rushes to restore itself to a previous state. It accepts gradual change as part of continued existence. This acceptance reduces stress on the system, but also limits recovery from damage. Radiation exposure continues to influence the body in subtle, cumulative ways. By this point, the effects are deeply woven into the aging process. Cells exhibit varying levels of resilience. Some tissues age faster than others. The body compensates by reallocating resources, favoring essential systems over peripheral ones. This internal prioritization occurs quietly, without conscious awareness. The nervous system has become profoundly inward-focused. External stimuli rarely command immediate attention. The brain devotes most of its resources to monitoring internal balance, maintaining routines, and anticipating minor disruptions. Thought unfolds slowly and deliberately. The mind prefers continuity over novelty, reflection over reaction. Attention spans have lengthened to an extraordinary degree. The body can remain focused on a single task or train of thought for hours without fatigue. However, switching tasks feels increasingly uncomfortable. The brain has specialized for sustained engagement rather than rapid adaptation. This specialization supports endurance, but it reduces flexibility. Memory continues to compress time. Long periods of experience blend together, especially when routines remain unchanged. The body remembers phases of existence rather than specific events. Emotional tone becomes the primary anchor of memory. Decades may be recalled as calm, reflective, or neutral, without clear distinction between individual moments. Imagination persists, but it has slowed and narrowed. Instead of seeking new ideas, the mind revisits familiar ones, refining them gradually. This iterative imagination provides mental engagement without requiring external stimulation. Creativity becomes a quiet, inward process rather than an outward expression. Emotional responses remain stable and subdued. The body rarely experiences intense joy or sorrow. Emotions unfold slowly and persist gently. Sudden emotional shifts feel disruptive rather than engaging. The body has learned that emotional volatility consumes energy and introduces risk. Calm has become the preferred emotional state. Social interaction, if present, has become deeply predictable. Conversations follow familiar patterns. Silence is comfortable and often preferred. The body's stress systems discourage confrontation. Even disagreement feels physiologically draining. Cooperation and compromise are reinforced not by ideology but by biology. Identity has become increasingly internal. Without external validation or comparison, the sense of self is maintained through memory and reflection. The body no longer expresses identity through appearance or behavior. Identity exists as a quiet narrative unfolding internally, largely unnoticed unless attention is directed toward it. The endocrine system remains oriented toward maintenance. Hormones associated with growth, reproduction, and competition remain minimal. Hormones associated with repair and stability dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state optimized for longevity rather than achievement. Skin and connective tissues continue to show signs of long-term artificial living. Skin remains thin and sensitive. Minor injuries heal slowly. The body treats its surface with care, avoiding damage whenever possible. Touch remains one of the few sensory experiences that consistently ground the body in physical reality. Sleep continues to be regular and deeply ingrained. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Dreams remain slow and abstract, often reflecting internal states rather than external narratives. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness remains soft, creating a sense of continuous awareness. As aging progresses, physical decline becomes more noticeable, but it is gradual and expected. Strength diminishes gently. Coordination remains sufficient for daily tasks. The body learns to move carefully, conserving energy and avoiding risk. Decline feels like narrowing rather than collapse. At this stage of the journey, the human body has fully transitioned into a mode of existence defined by persistence rather than progress. It no longer prepares for arrival, return, or rescue. The concept of destination has lost emotional significance. What matters is balance, routine, and the maintenance of systems that support life. The journey through space has become indistinguishable from the passage of time itself. The body experiences existence not as movement towards something else, but as continuous presence. Survival no longer feels like an achievement. It feels inevitable. In this phase, the human body demonstrates its deepest resilience. It does not fight the environment, it aligns with it. Given enough time and consistency, the body reshapes itself until even the most unnatural conditions feel ordinary, continuing quietly, steadily, without resistance. As the journey moves beyond what once would have been considered an entire human lifetime, the body enters a phase where survival is no longer experienced as something being actively achieved. It is simply assumed. The systems that once demanded attention now operate quietly, almost invisibly, sustaining existence without asking to be noticed. The body no longer checks itself against danger, improvement, or decline. It exists in a state where continuation feels natural and interruption feels abstract. By this point, the body's relationship with effort has fundamentally changed. Effort is no longer associated with progress or reward. It is associated only with necessity. Every movement, every action is evaluated unconsciously for whether it is required. Anything unnecessary is avoided. This is not laziness, it is refinement. The body has learned that in a closed environment, unnecessary effort carries risk without benefit. Physical motion has become deeply economical. Movements are smooth, controlled, and predictable. The body no longer rushes. Speed feels pointless and uncomfortable. Even when tasks require precision or coordination, the body approaches them slowly, allowing momentum and inertia to do most of the work. This creates a style of movement that feels almost detached from urgency, as if the body is floating not just through space but through time. Muscle tissue remains functional but minimal. The body no longer maintains reserves of strength for challenges that will never come. Instead, it preserves just enough capacity to perform daily tasks reliably. The sensation of strain has almost disappeared from experience. When it does occur, it is immediately recognized as something to avoid rather than overcome. The body has learned that endurance is not built through pushing limits, but through respecting them. The skeletal system continues to exist in its low-gravity equilibrium. Bones no longer signal weakness or strength. They simply exist as structural components suited to their environment. The body does not perceive itself as fragile, because fragility is defined by forces that no longer act upon it. Within this world, the skeleton is not something to test, it is something to protect. The cardiovascular system remains remarkably stable. The heart beats with a consistency that would once have seemed unnatural. Fluctuations in heart rate are rare and mild. Blood pressure remains low. The body no longer experiences the internal drama of exertion, recovery, or adrenaline surges. This creates a deep sense of physiological calm that permeates every aspect of existence. Breathing continues as a quiet background process. The lungs operate efficiently but without range. Deep breaths are rare and often feel exaggerated. The body no longer associates breathing with emotional states. Fear, excitement, and anticipation no longer reshape respiration. Breath exists simply to sustain, not to signal. The immune system continues its long-term balancing act. It remains vigilant but conservative, responding slowly and deliberately to threats. Infections are rare, but recovery is gradual. The body no longer rushes to restore itself to a previous state. It accepts small, persistent imperfections as part of continued function. Healing becomes a slow negotiation rather than a battle. Radiation exposure, now accumulated over many decades, has shaped the body's internal landscape in subtle but pervasive ways. Cellular damage is unevenly distributed. Some tissues show signs of advanced aging, while others remain surprisingly resilient. The body compensates by reallocating resources, favouring systems essential for daily life. This internal prioritization occurs quietly, without conscious awareness. The nervous system has become highly specialized for internal regulation. External stimuli rarely demand immediate response. The brain devotes most of its energy to monitoring internal states, maintaining routine, and anticipating minor disruptions. Thought unfolds slowly and deliberately. Impulsivity has largely disappeared. The mind prefers predictability, continuity, and reflection. Attention is now exceptionally stable. The body can remain focused on a single task or train of thought for extended periods without fatigue. However, shifting attention feels increasingly uncomfortable. The brain has become optimized for sustained engagement rather than rapid adaptation. This specialization supports endurance but limits flexibility. Memory continues to compress experience. Long spans of time blur together, especially when routines remain unchanged. The body remembers not what happened, but how it felt to exist during those periods. Emotional tone becomes the primary anchor of memory. Decades may be remembered as calm, reflective, or neutral, without clear separation between individual years. Imagination remains active, but it no longer seeks novelty. Instead, it revisits familiar ideas, refining them gradually. The mind circles the same questions and images, viewing them from slightly different angles over time. This iterative process provides mental engagement without requiring external input. Creativity becomes inward, slow, and contemplative. Emotional life remains subdued but present. Strong emotions are rare and often feel disruptive. The body prefers emotional states that can be sustained without fluctuation. Contentment becomes the default condition, not as a peak experience, but as a steady background. Discomfort arises primarily from disruptions to routine rather than from external threats. Social interaction, if present, has reached a state of deep equilibrium. Roles are well understood. Communication is efficient and often minimal. Silence is comfortable and frequently preferred. The body's stress systems discourage confrontation, bound by gravities above. Even mild conflict feels physiologically draining. Cooperation is reinforced not by ideology but by biology. Identity has become almost entirely internal. Without external validation, comparison, or change, the sense of self is maintained through memory and thought. The body no longer expresses identity through movement, appearance, or social signaling. Identity exists as a quiet narrative unfolding internally, rarely examined unless attention is directed toward it. The endocrine system remains firmly in maintenance mode. Hormones associated with growth, reproduction, and competition are minimal. Hormones associated with repair, balance, and preservation dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state optimized for longevity rather than expansion or achievement. Skin and connective tissues continue to reflect long-term artificial living. Skin remains thin and sensitive. Healing is slow. The body treats its surface with care, avoiding injury whenever possible. Touch becomes one of the few sensations that reliably anchor the body in physical reality, providing reassurance of presence and continuity. Sleep remains deeply ingrained and predictable. The body enters rest easily. Sleep cycles are long and stable. Dreams are frequent but subdued, often abstract and symbolic rather than narrative. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness continues to soften, creating a sense of continuous awareness rather than distinct states. As aging advances, decline becomes more apparent, but it is gradual and expected. Strength fades gently. Coordination remains sufficient for daily tasks. The body learns to move carefully, conserving energy and avoiding risk. Decline feels like narrowing rather than failure. At this stage of the journey, the human body has fully transitioned into a mode of existence defined by persistence rather than progress. It no longer prepares for arrival, rescue, or return. The concept of destination has lost its emotional weight. What matters is balance, routine, and the quiet maintenance of systems that support life. The journey through space has become inseparable from the passage of time itself. The body experiences existence not as movement towards something else, but as continuous presence. Survival no longer feels like an achievement. It feels inevitable. In this phase, the human body reveals one of its deepest truths. It does not require meaning, novelty, or expansion to continue. Given enough time and consistency, it will reshape itself until endurance becomes effortless, carrying on not through struggle, but through alignment with what remains. As the voyage moves further into its final decades, the human body enters a state where even the idea of later begins to lose meaning. The body no longer projects itself forward in time. It does not anticipate a future that feels different from the present. Instead, existence becomes a continuous surface, smooth and uninterrupted, where each moment blends almost seamlessly into the next. The body does not feel trapped in this continuity. It feels settled within it. At this stage, biological processes operate with remarkable quietness. Nothing in the body calls attention to itself unless something drifts out of balance. Hunger arrives gently and predictably, more as a reminder than a demand. Thirst is subtle, noticed early and easily addressed. Fatigue unfolds slowly, like a dimming rather than a sudden drop. The body has learned to communicate with itself in whispers rather than alarms. Movement has become deeply ingrained as a form of preservation. The body no longer associates motion with productivity or achievement. Movement exists to maintain circulation, coordination, and familiarity with space. Every action is deliberate, unhurried, and efficient. The body avoids sudden changes not out of fear, but because abruptness feels unnecessary and uncomfortable. Smoothness has become the default. Muscle activity remains low but constant. The muscles that support posture, grip, and controlled motion continue to function reliably. There is no longer any sense of training or conditioning. Exercise exists purely as maintenance, performed not to improve capacity but to prevent loss. The body no longer seeks strength, it seeks continuity. The skeletal system exists in a state that feels almost neutral. Bones neither strengthen nor noticeably weaken. They remain light, flexible, and suited to their environment. The body no longer perceives its skeleton as something that must be protected from strain, because strain no longer exists in meaningful ways. Instead, the skeleton becomes an invisible framework, quietly supporting existence without drawing attention. The cardiovascular system continues its steady, unwavering rhythm. The heart beats with consistency that borders on monotony. Variability is minimal. The body rarely experiences palpitations, surges, or drops. This internal stability reinforces a sense of safety that is felt not emotionally but physically. The body trusts its own rhythms completely. Breathing remains shallow, even, and almost unnoticeable. The lungs perform their function without drama. Deep breaths feel unusual and are often taken only deliberately. The body no longer associates breath with emotional shifts. Calm, concern, focus, and rest all share the same respiratory pattern. Breath has become a constant background process rather than an expressive one. The immune system shows signs of deep adaptation. It no longer prepares for sudden invasion. Instead, it monitors quietly, responding slowly when necessary. Inflammation remains low and persistent rather than acute. Healing is gradual. The body no longer aims to restore itself perfectly. It aims to remain functional. Small imperfections accumulate, but they do not disrupt overall balance. Radiation exposure continues to leave its subtle imprint. By now, the body carries a long history of microscopic damage, unevenly distributed across tissues. Some areas show signs of accelerated aging, others remain comparatively preserved. The body compensates through quiet redistribution of resources, favoring systems essential to daily life. This internal rebalancing happens continuously, without conscious awareness. The nervous system has become almost entirely inward-oriented. External stimuli rarely feel urgent or compelling. The brain dedicates most of its attention to internal regulation, maintaining equilibrium across systems. Thoughts unfold slowly and steadily. The mind has little interest in speed, novelty, or surprise. It prefers coherence. Attention has become deeply stable. The body can remain focused on a single activity or thought for extended periods without discomfort. Distraction is rare. However, abrupt shifts in focus feel unsettling. The brain has optimized itself for continuity rather than flexibility. This supports endurance but narrows responsiveness. Memory continues to compress time. Long spans of existence merge into broad impressions rather than detailed records. The body remembers periods of life by how they felt rather than by what occurred. Emotional tone becomes the primary marker of memory. Entire decades may be recalled as quiet, reflective, or neutral without clear boundaries. Imagination persists, but it has slowed and turned inward. Rather than inventing new worlds, the mind revisits familiar ones. Ideas are refined, reconsidered, and re-examined over long periods. This slow creativity provides mental engagement without requiring external stimulation. Thought becomes a form of gentle movement rather than exploration. Emotional life remains calm and even. Strong emotions are rare and often feel disruptive when they arise. The body prefers emotional states that can be sustained without fluctuation. Contentment becomes a baseline rather than a peak. Discomfort arises primarily when routine is disrupted, not when danger appears. Social interaction, if present, has settled into an almost static equilibrium. Communication is efficient, predictable, and often minimal. Silence feels comfortable and safe. The body's stress system strongly discourages conflict. Even minor tension feels physically draining. Cooperation becomes not just a social preference, but a biological necessity. Identity continues to withdraw from external expression. Without changing environments or social comparison, the sense of self exists primarily as an internal narrative. The body no longer signals identity through movement, appearance, or behavior. Identity becomes something quietly observed rather than actively performed. The endocrine system remains firmly oriented towards preservation. Hormones related to ambition, competition, and reproduction remain low. Hormones supporting maintenance, repair, and balance dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state optimized for survival over long durations rather than achievement or growth. Skin and connective tissue continue to show the effects of prolonged artificial living. Skin is thin, sensitive, and slow to heal. The body treats its surface with care, avoiding injury whenever possible. Touch remains one of the most grounding sensory experiences, reminding the body of its physical presence. Sleep remains one of the most stable aspects of existence. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Sleep cycles are long and consistent. Dreams are frequent but abstract, often reflecting internal states rather than external events. The boundary between sleeping and waking thought continues to blur, creating a sense of continuous consciousness. As aging advances, decline becomes more noticeable, but it remains gradual and expected. Strength continues to diminish gently. Coordination remains adequate for familiar tasks. The body learns to move carefully, conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary risk. Decline feels like narrowing rather than collapse. At this stage of the journey, the human body has fully settled into a mode of existence defined by endurance. It no longer anticipates arrival, rescue, or return. The idea of destination has dissolved entirely. What remains is balance, routine, and the quiet maintenance of life within a closed world. The journey through space no longer feels like travel. It feels like a condition of being. Time passes, but the body does not experience it as motion toward an endpoint. It experiences it as continuity. In this phase, the human body demonstrates one of its most profound capacities, the ability to exist without needing change to justify existence. Given enough time and consistency, it reshapes itself until survival becomes effortless, continuing not through struggle or hope, but through quiet alignment with what is. As the voyage continues into a span that would once have felt unimaginable, the human body reaches a condition where existence itself feels almost self-sustaining, not energized, not fragile, but steady in a way that resists definition. The body no longer feels like it is surviving something difficult. Difficulty has faded into irrelevance. What remains is a biological system that has learned how to continue quietly, with minimal friction, in an environment that no longer feels hostile simply because it has become familiar. By now, the body's internal sense of time has nearly dissolved. Days no longer feel discrete. Weeks and months blend together without clear boundaries. The body does not track time through events because events have become rare. Instead, it tracks time through internal states, energy levels, subtle shifts in mood, the slow progression of aging felt not as decline but as gentle change. Time becomes something the body inhabits rather than measures. Physical sensation continues to soften. The nervous system no longer amplifies signals the way it once did. Pain, when it occurs, is dull and distant, more informational than urgent. Pleasure is subtle, spread across long durations rather than concentrated into peaks. Sensory input has become something the body receives passively rather than actively seeks. This does not feel like numbness. It feels like quiet clarity. Movement has become almost automatic, guided by deeply ingrained patterns rather than conscious intention. The body knows where it is in space without needing to think about it. Every motion is economical, flowing smoothly from one position to another. There is no hesitation, but also no haste. The body moves not to accomplish something quickly, but to maintain continuity. Muscle tissue continues its long-term equilibrium. There is no sense of strength increasing or decreasing in noticeable ways. Muscles exist to support function, not expression. The body no longer associates muscle with power or performance. Muscle is simply part of the structure that allows movement to remain reliable. When fatigue appears, it is recognized early and addressed immediately. The body has learned not to push. The skeletal system remains unchanged in any dramatic sense. Bones exist quietly, bearing no weight, resisting no strain. The processes that once remodeled bone through impact and stress have been dormant for decades. Instead, bones maintain their form through slow metabolic balance. The body does not think of itself as fragile or strong. Those concepts no longer apply. The skeleton is simply adequate. The cardiovascular system continues its steady rhythm, so consistent that it fades from awareness entirely. The heart beats without drama, without urgency. Blood moves smoothly, evenly, without sudden redistribution. The body rarely experiences sensations like dizziness, pounding, or pressure. This internal stability creates a baseline sense of safety that requires no conscious reassurance. Breathing remains shallow, even, and constant. The lungs work quietly, exchanging gases efficiently without requiring attention. Deep breaths feel almost ceremonial when they occur, taken deliberately rather than reflexively. The body no longer uses breathing as an emotional signal. Calm, focus, concern, and rest all share the same respiratory rhythm. The immune system has settled into a mode that favors long-term balance over rapid response. It remains alert but cautious. Inflammation persists at low levels, addressing damage gradually rather than aggressively. Healing occurs slowly, often incompletely, but sufficiently. The body no longer expects to return to a previous state of perfection. It accepts incremental change as part of existence. Radiation exposure continues to shape the body's internal landscape in subtle ways. By this point, its effects are deeply integrated into aging itself. Cellular damage accumulates unevenly, creating areas of vulnerability alongside areas of resilience. The body compensates continuously, reallocating resources to preserve essential functions. This process is quiet and ongoing, rarely felt consciously. The nervous system has become profoundly oriented toward regulation rather than reaction. External stimuli are processed slowly, without urgency. The brain dedicates most of its energy to maintaining internal equilibrium. Thoughts unfold deliberately, often looping gently rather than progressing linearly. Impulses are rare. Curiosity persists, but it is inward rather than outward. Tension has become exceptionally stable. The body can remain focused on a single thought, activity, or internal sensation for long periods without discomfort. Distraction is uncommon. However, sudden changes in environment or routine feel disproportionately disruptive. The brain has optimized itself for continuity, not flexibility. Memory continues to simplify experience. Instead of storing detailed narratives, the body retains broad impressions. Emotional tone becomes the primary marker of remembered time. Entire spans of life are recalled as calm, reflective, or neutral. Specific events fade, not because they are forgotten, but because they no longer stand out against the uniform background of routine. Imagination remains active, but it has become slow and recursive. The mind revisits familiar ideas repeatedly, exploring them from slightly different perspectives over long periods. This inward creativity provides stimulation without requiring novelty. The imagination no longer constructs dramatic scenarios. It refines subtle ones. Emotional life remains remarkably even. Strong emotions are rare and often feel intrusive. The body prefers emotional states that can be maintained indefinitely. Contentment is not experienced as happiness, but as absence of disturbance. Discomfort arises primarily from disruption of routine rather than from fear or loss. Social interaction, if present, has reached a state of deep equilibrium. Communication is efficient, predictable, and often minimal. Silence feels safe and natural. The body's stress responses strongly discourage conflict. Even mild tension produces noticeable discomfort, reinforcing cooperation as the easiest path forward. Identity has become almost entirely internal and abstract. Without external change or comparison, the sense of self exists primarily as a continuous internal presence. The body no longer performs identity through behavior, appearance, or role. Identity becomes something quietly observed rather than actively expressed. The endocrine system remains fully committed to preservation. Hormones associated with ambition, competition, and reproduction remain minimal. Hormones supporting repair, balance, and maintenance dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state optimized for endurance rather than achievement. Skin and connective tissues continue to reflect long-term artificial living. Skin is thin and sensitive, healing slowly. The body treats its surface carefully, aware that damage carries lasting consequences. Touch remains one of the most grounding sensory experiences, reinforcing a sense of physical existence. Sleep remains deeply ingrained and reliable. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Sleep cycles are long and stable. Dreams are frequent but abstract, often reflecting internal states rather than external narratives. The boundary between sleep and waking thought continues to blur, creating a sense of continuous awareness. As aging progresses, decline becomes more apparent but remains gentle. Strength fades slowly. Coordination remains sufficient for familiar tasks. The body adapts by moving carefully, conserving energy and avoiding risk. Decline feels like gradual narrowing rather than collapse. At this stage of the journey, the human body exists in a condition that feels almost complete. Not finished, not resolved, but settled. It no longer anticipates rescue, arrival, or return. The idea of destination has lost all emotional relevance. What remains is balance, routine, and the quiet continuation of life within a closed system. The journey through space has become indistinguishable from the experience of time itself. The body does not feel as though it is going somewhere. It feels as though it is remaining, moment after moment, without resistance. In this phase, the human body reveals a profound truth about its nature. Given enough time, stability, and consistency, it does not need excitement, challenge, or meaning to persist. It reshapes itself until endurance becomes effortless, continuing not through struggle or hope, but through quiet alignment with the conditions that remain. As the journey reaches its furthest stretch, the human body arrives at a state that can no longer be described as adaptation, endurance, or even aging in the familiar sense. What emerges instead is a form of biological persistence, so refined that it feels almost self-maintaining. The body does not struggle to remain alive. It does not actively resist decline. It simply continues, shaped by time so thoroughly that time itself no longer feels like an external force acting upon it. At this stage, the body no longer experiences days as beginnings and endings. There is no clear sense of morning anticipation or evening closure. Consciousness drifts gently between states of wakefulness and rest, with soft transitions rather than sharp boundaries. The body exists in a near continuous present, where the difference between now and later has lost practical importance. Time is no longer something that passes, it is something that surrounds. Physical sensations have become sparse but precise. The body is acutely aware of its internal balance, yet rarely distracted by discomfort. Hunger, thirst, and fatigue still appear, but they do so gradually, like signals rising slowly from a distance. Even pain, when it appears, feels more like information than distress. It is noted, acknowledged, and addressed without urgency. Movement has become almost symbolic. The body moves because movement maintains continuity, not because it seeks progress. Every motion is familiar, efficient, and conservative. The body no longer explores space, it occupies it. Limbs glide with practiced ease, guided by muscle memory refined over decades. There is no wasted energy, no hesitation, no impulsive action. Motion has become an extension of stillness rather than its opposite. Muscle tissue exists in its final equilibrium. There is no further loss that feels significant, but no gain either. Muscles are sufficient for the tasks required of them and nothing more. The body no longer experiences strength as a capability to be tested. Strength has become irrelevant. Reliability has replaced power as the defining physical trait. The skeletal system, long removed from gravity's demands, has settled into quiet adequacy. Bones no longer carry the symbolic meaning they once did on Earth. They are not associated with fragility or resilience. They are simply part of the structure that allows the body to remain intact in its environment. The idea of weight bearing has become abstract, something remembered intellectually but not felt. The heart continues its steady rhythm, so consistent that it rarely enters awareness. It no longer responds dramatically to emotion or exertion. The body does not feel its heart race or slow in meaningful ways. Circulation is smooth, even, and dependable. This internal stability creates a baseline sense of safety that no longer needs reassurance. The body trusts itself completely. Breathing remains shallow, regular, and unobtrusive. The lungs function efficiently, but without range. Deep breaths are rare and deliberate, often taken not out of need, but out of habit. Breath has lost its emotional expressiveness. It no longer reflects excitement, fear, or relief. It exists solely to sustain. The immune system continues its slow, careful work. It has long since abandoned the idea of rapid, aggressive response. Instead, it manages threats gradually, addressing problems over time rather than overwhelming them. Healing occurs, but imperfectly. Small irregularities persist. The body no longer expects restoration to an earlier state. It accepts gradual change as part of continuation. Radiation exposure, accumulated over many decades, has left its quiet mark. Cellular damage exists everywhere in small amounts, unevenly distributed, subtly altering function. Yet the body compensates continuously, reallocating resources to preserve essential systems. This compensation is not felt consciously, it is simply part of how the body now exists. The nervous system has become deeply internalized. External stimuli are processed slowly, without urgency or emotional amplification. The brain devotes its attention almost entirely to maintaining internal balance. Thought unfolds gently, often looping rather than progressing. Curiosity remains, but it is directed inward, toward reflection rather than discovery. Attention has become extraordinarily stable. The mind can remain focused on a single sensation, memory, or idea for long periods without discomfort. Distraction is rare. At the same time, sudden changes feel unsettling. The brain has shaped itself for continuity, not flexibility. Novelty is no longer energizing, it is disruptive. Memory has transformed almost completely. Events are no longer stored as narratives with beginnings and endings. Instead, memory exists as broad impressions, emotional climates, and internal states. Entire stretches of existence are remembered as calm, neutral, or reflective. Specific moments blur together, not because they are forgotten, but because nothing distinguishes them strongly enough to stand apart. Imagination remains, but it is quiet and recursive. The mind revisits the same ideas repeatedly, refining them slowly over time. There is no urge to invent new worlds or scenarios. Thought has become contemplative rather than creative in the outward sense. The imagination turns inward, exploring meaning without needing novelty. Emotional life is remarkably even. Strong emotions are rare and often feel intrusive. The body prefers emotional states that can be sustained indefinitely. Contentment exists not as happiness, but as absence of disturbance. When discomfort arises, it is usually linked to disruption of routine rather than fear, loss, or desire. Social presence, if it exists at all, has become deeply understated. Communication is minimal, efficient, and predictable. Silence is no longer awkward or empty. It feels natural. The body's stress systems strongly discourage conflict. Even mild tension produces physical discomfort, reinforcing cooperation and calm as the easiest states to maintain. Identity has become abstract and internal. Without changing environments, roles, or comparisons, the sense of self exists primarily as a continuous awareness rather than a defined personality. The body no longer performs identity, it simply exists as itself, moment to moment, without needing reinforcement. The endocrine system remains fully committed to preservation. Hormones associated with ambition, competition, and reproduction are minimal. Hormones supporting maintenance and balance dominate. The body exists in a low-energy state optimized for longevity rather than achievement. Motivation arises only from necessity, not desire. Skin and connective tissue continue to reflect the long passage of time in artificial conditions. Skin is thin, sensitive, slow to heal. The body treats its surface carefully, aware that damage carries lasting consequences. Touch remains one of the few sensations that reliably anchor the body in physical reality. Sleep remains deeply ingrained. The body enters rest easily and predictably. Sleep cycles are long and stable. Dreams are abstract and slow, often reflecting internal states rather than external narratives. The boundary between sleeping and waking thought is soft, creating a sense of continuous awareness rather than discrete states. As the body continues to age, decline no longer feels like something happening. It feels like something that has already happened and settled. Strength is minimal, coordination is sufficient. Energy is limited but steady. The body has learned how to exist comfortably within its narrowing capabilities. At this point, the human body no longer anticipates rescue, arrival, or return. Those concepts have lost all emotional meaning. The journey has ceased to be a path towards something else. It has become a condition of existence. The body does not feel lonely in this state. It does not feel fulfilled either. Those emotions belong to environments rich in contrast. Here, existence is defined by continuity. Life continues not because it strives, but because nothing interrupts it. What remains is a human body that has been reshaped by time, isolation, and consistency into something quieter than its original form, yet no less alive. It exists without urgency, without expectation, without resistance. In this final state, the body reveals a fundamental truth about human biology. When stripped of novelty, struggle, and ambition, it does not collapse, it simplifies. It endures. The journey does not end with revelation, arrival, or transformation. It ends with persistence. And in that persistence, the human body continues, steady, quiet, and complete in its own way, moving not toward a destination, but forward through time itself.